In the quiet village of Bollingen, on the shores of Lake Zurich, the psychologist Carl Jung built a monument to the human mind. It was not a grand university hall or a clinical office, but a stone tower constructed largely with his own hands. Jung began this project in 1922, seeking a physical space that could contain the sheer magnitude of his intellectual ambition. He did not build it to escape the world in the sense of vacation or retreat. He built it because of the work he needed to do, the plumbing of the collective unconscious, the analytical psychology that would define his legacy, could not be performed in the fractured, noisy rhythm of ordinary life. In Bollingen, there was no electricity. There was no telephone. The heat came from a fire he tended himself. The light came from oil lamps. In this silence, surrounded by thick stone walls, Jung entered a state of profound, unbroken concentration. He locked the doors in the morning and did not emerge until he had wrestled his complex, abstract thoughts into clarity. This was not merely a habit of an eccentric genius. It was a calculated strategy. Jung understood something that the modern world has largely forgotten, that to produce work of lasting value, one must disconnect from the shallows and descend into the deep. This story of Jung and his tower stands in stark, violent contrast to the reality of the 21st century knowledge worker. If Jung's life was defined by the solidity of stone and the weight of silence, our lives are defined by the ephemeral flicker of screens and the persistent, nagging buzz of connectivity. We exist in a state of continuous partial attention. We sit in open-plan offices designed to maximize collaboration, but which effectively destroy concentration. We carry devices in our pockets that serve as portals to a billion interruptions, each one demanding a slice of our cognitive bandwidth. We have convinced ourselves that this frenetic activity, the answering of emails within minutes, the participation in endless Slack channels, the constant scanning of headlines, is synonymous with productivity. We feel busy. We are exhausted by the end of the day. But if we are honest, brutally honest, we often look back at the week and wonder what we actually built. What stone did we lay? What complex problem did we solve? This is the crisis that Cal Newport identifies in Deep Work. He argues that we are in the midst of a massive, unspoken shift in the economy of the mind. As the world becomes noisier, the ability to focus without distraction is becoming the rarest and most valuable asset in the marketplace. Newport calls this ability deep work. It is professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their limit. These efforts create new value, improve your skill, and are hard to replicate. Deep work is what allowed Jung to write his seminal texts. It is what allows a computer programmer to hold a complex algorithm in their mind long enough to debug it. It is what allows a writer to weave a plot that resonates with the human soul. It is the act of going to the absolute bottom of the ocean, where the pressure is immense but the treasures are found. Opposing this is what Newport terms shallow work. This is the non-cognitive, logistical style work, often performed while distracted. These efforts tend to not create much new value in the world and are easy to replicate. This is the world of the status update, the routine email, the PowerPoint tweak, the administrative shuffle. The danger, Newport warns, is not that shallow work is evil. The danger is that shallow work is seductive. It is easier. It provides a quick hit of accomplishment. Sending 10 emails feels like work. It gives us the dopamine hit of crossing items off a list. But a life spent in the shallows is a life that leaves no trace. The tragedy of the modern worker is that they are slowly losing the ability to go deep, not because they lack the intelligence, but because they have atrophied the muscle of focus. The hypothesis of this book is simple, yet it lands with the weight of revelation. The ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare at exactly the same time it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive. This is not a book about how to check your email more efficiently. It is not a collection of life hacks for the disorganized. It is a manifesto for a different kind of life. It is a call to arms to reject the tyranny of the immediate and to reclaim the sovereignty of your own attention. Consider the complexity of the modern world. We are moving into an era dominated by intelligent machines, complex systems, and rapid change. To survive and thrive in this environment, one must be able to master hard things quickly. You cannot learn a complex new software or understand a shift in global markets or master a new medical technique while checking Instagram every 10 minutes. The cognitive residue of that distraction lingers, clouding your mind like silt stirred up in a clear pond. Learning requires depth. Mastery requires the ability to sustain attention on a single target for hours at a time, bending your mind around the problem until it cracks. Those who lose this ability will be left behind, relegated to the role of human routers, simply moving information from one place to another until a script can do it for them. But the argument for deep work extends beyond the merely economic. There is a philosophical and emotional dimension to this crisis that is arguably more urgent. A life spent in the shallows is a life of fragmentation. When our attention is shattered into 1,000 pieces, we lose a coherent narrative of our own days. We feel a low-level hum of anxiety, a sense that we are missing something, that we are skimming the surface of existence. In contrast, the state of deep work is deeply satisfying. It connects to what the psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, a state where a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Think about the last time you were truly lost in a task. Maybe it was writing code or painting or solving a difficult math problem or even building a cabinet. You looked up and hours had passed. You felt tired, yes, but it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a runner who has finished a race, not the exhaustion of a bureaucrat who has finished a meeting. That feeling is a signal that you have touched the deep. It is a signal that you are operating at the height of your human potential. Newport suggests that a deep life is not just a more productive life. It is a better life. It is a life rich with meaning. Because meaning is not found in the chaotic noise of the shallows. It is found in the depths. However, moving from the shallows to the deep is not a simple matter of willpower. It requires a fundamental restructuring of how we approach our days. The world is conspiring against depth. The tools we rely on, social media, smartphones, instant messaging, are engineered by some of the smartest minds in the world to be addictive. They are slot machines in our pockets, designed to fragment our attention and keep us scrolling. To choose deep work is to choose a kind of rebellion. We often look at figures like Bill Gates, who famously takes think weeks, where he isolates himself in a cabin with nothing but books and papers, as anomalies. We think, well, he can do that because he is a billionaire. Newport inverts this logic. He argues that Bill Gates became a billionaire because he prioritized that kind of deep thinking from the very beginning. When Gates was building the foundation of Microsoft, he would work with such intensity that he would collapse into sleep under his desk, wake up, and immediately resume typing. That is the intensity of the deep. It is an intensity that burns away the trivial and leaves only the essential. As we embark on this journey through deep work, we must be prepared to confront our own habits with an uncomfortable level of scrutiny. We will have to ask ourselves difficult questions. How much of our work is actually just motion? How often do we use busyness as a shield to avoid the pain of hard thinking? The path Newport lays out is not easy. It asks us to treat our attention as a sacred resource, not a cheap commodity to be traded for a moment of entertainment. It asks us to build our own metaphorical towers, to find our own Bollingen amidst the noise of the 21st century. The promise, however, is immense. By cultivating the ability to work deeply, we open the door to a level of productivity and satisfaction that seems almost magical to the distracted masses. We stop being reactive and start being generative. We stop surviving the day and start mastering it. The deep life is waiting, but to enter it, we must first be willing to leave the shore, turn our backs on the noise, and dive. This book is the map for that descent. It is time to leave the shallows behind. To understand the terrifying and exhilarating reality of the modern economy, we must look at a man named Nate Silver. In the months leading up to the 2012 U.S. presidential election, the political world was a cacophony of noise. Pundits on cable news screamed over one another, relying on gut instinct, insider gossip, and vague trends to predict whether Barack Obama or Mitt Romney would take the White House. It was a circus of shallow analysis, a frenzy of hot takes that evaporated as quickly as they were spoken. But while the talking heads were busy generating sound bites, Nate Silver was doing something else entirely. He was not on television. He was likely sitting in silence, staring at a screen, feeding thousands of individual polls into a complex statistical model he had built himself. He was performing a high-wire act of cognitive endurance, looking for the signal amidst the static. When the dust settled on election night, the pundits were stunned. Silver had not just predicted the winner, he had correctly called the outcome in 50 out of 50 states. Nate Silver's triumph was not a stroke of luck. It was a demonstration of a new kind of power. He represented a specific archetype that was beginning to dominate the 21st century, the worker who can manipulate complex, intelligent machines to produce results that are impossible for a human to achieve alone. Silver was not doing manual labor, and he was not doing standard administrative work. He was engaging in a deep, abstract collaboration with data. This story is important not because of politics, but because of what it signals about the future of work. We are living through a period of economic disruption that economists Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee call the Great Restructuring. The comfortable middle is falling out of the market. The old contract, where you showed up, did average work, and received an average middle-class lifestyle, is being shredded by the dual forces of automation and globalization. In this new, ruthless landscape, mediocrity is not just unrewarded. It is actively punished. The economy is splitting into two distinct groups, those who will be left behind and those who will thrive. The terrifying truth is that for the vast majority of people, the trajectory is downward. As intelligent machines and algorithms become cheaper and more capable, they are swallowing up jobs that used to require a college degree. Bookkeeping, basic analysis, legal discovery, middle management. These roles are eroding. However, for a specific minority, this same shift is a golden age. If you can create something unique, if you can master the complex tools of the digital age, or if you're the absolute best at what you do, the rewards are not just good. They are disproportionately massive. Cal Newport identifies three groups who will own the future: the high-skilled workers, the superstars, and the owners. And the entrance ticket to the first two groups is the ability to perform deep work. Let us examine the high-skilled worker. This is the person who can work with intelligent machines. We are rapidly moving away from an economy where people use tools to an economy where people collaborate with digital minds. It is no longer enough to know how to use Excel. You must know how to code the script that automates the analysis. It is not enough to be a doctor. You must be the doctor who can interpret the complex output of an AI diagnostic tool and apply it to a unique patient history. But here is the catch. These machines are fiendishly complex. They change rapidly. To master them, you cannot simply skim a manual or watch a 3-minute tutorial while checking your email. You must be able to load the entire logic of the system into your brain, twist it around, and understand its architecture. This requires a specific kind of cognitive heavy lifting. It requires the ability to learn hard things quickly. This brings us to the first pillar of why deep work is valuable. Deep work is the engine of learning. To understand this, we have to look inside the human brain. When you're trying to learn a new skill, whether it's a programming language, a complex form of mathematics, or the nuances of a new market, you are physically changing the structure of your brain. You are firing specific neural circuits. Neuroscientists have discovered that to cement these circuits, to make them fire faster and more effortlessly, the neurons must be wrapped in a fatty substance called myelin. Myelin is the insulation of the brain's wiring. The more myelin you have around a circuit, the faster and more accurately the signal travels. This is what mastery looks like on a biological level. But here's the critical insight. Myelin does not grow by accident. It is produced only when the relevant neurons fire repeatedly and in isolation. This is what the psychologist Anders Ericsson calls deliberate practice. It is the act of focusing intensely on the specific task you are trying to master, pushing yourself to the limit of your ability, and correcting errors in real time. If you are trying to learn a complex skill while your attention is fragmented, checking your phone every 10 minutes, keeping an eye on your inbox, you are firing the wrong circuits. You are diluting the signal. You are preventing the myelination process. In the new economy, the ability to learn hard things quickly is the only job security that exists. If you cannot focus, you cannot learn. And if you cannot learn, you will be replaced by a machine or by someone who can. Now, consider the second group, the superstars. We have moved from a local economy to a global one. In the past, if you were the best car salesman in your town, you had a secure job. You didn't have to be the best in the world. You just had to be the best in a 10-mile radius. But technology has collapsed distance. Today, if a company wants a programmer, a consultant, a writer, or a designer, they do not need to look at the local talent pool. They can hire the absolute best person in the world, regardless of where they live. This creates a winner-take-all market. The gap between being good and being great is no longer a small difference in income. It is the difference between enormous wealth and unemployment. To become a superstar, to reach that elite tier of performance, you must produce at a level of quality and speed that is undeniable. This brings us to the second pillar. Deep work is the engine of elite production. There is a simple, unforgiving equation that governs productivity. High-quality work produced equals time spent x intensity of focus. Most people try to increase their output by increasing the time spent. They work longer hours, stay late, and grind through weekends. But because their intensity of focus is low, because they are constantly switching contexts, their total output remains mediocre. They are busy, but they are not productive. The true superstar understands that the variable to manipulate is intensity. By maximizing focus, by entering a state of deep work, they can produce in 4 hours what a distracted worker produces in 12. But it is not just about speed. It is about the quality of the cognitive output. When you switch tasks, when you glance at an email in the middle of writing a report, a phenomenon occurs called attention residue. This concept, introduced by business professor Sophie Leroy, reveals a startling weakness in the human mind. When you switch from task A to task B, your attention does not follow you instantly. A residue of your attention remains stuck thinking about the original task. Even if the interruption was just a quick check of a notification, your brain is now processing two things at once. You are operating with a cognitive handicap. Imagine a computer with 100 tabs open. It slows down. It lags. This is the state of the modern worker's mind. They are perpetually working through a thick sludge of attention residue. The superstar, the deep worker, operates with a single tab open. Their mind is clear. Their processing power is fully allocated to the problem at hand. And as a result, they produce work that has a crystalline clarity and depth that the distracted masses cannot hope to replicate. In a marketplace that is flooded with noise and average content, deep work is the only way to cut through. It is the only way to produce the kind of results that command a premium. This economic reality is uncomfortable. It strikes at the heart of our insecurities. We like to believe that if we just show up, reply to our emails, and sit in meetings, we are doing our job. We confuse busyness with productivity. In the absence of clear metrics, which is common in knowledge work, we fall back on what Newport calls busyness as a proxy for productivity. We do a lot of things in a visible manner because we are terrified that if we stop, we will be revealed as non-essential. But the market is becoming smarter. The market is beginning to realize that a manager who sends 500 emails a week but produces no new strategy is not an asset. They are an overhead. The owners, the third group, those with the capital, are ruthless in their pursuit of efficiency. They will not pay for shallow work if they can help it. They will pay for the signal, not the noise. They will invest in the Nate Silvers of the world, the people who can go into the data and come out with truth. They will invest in the master craftsmen who can build the code that scales to millions of users. They will invest in the creative who can write the screenplay that captures the global imagination. They are not looking for people who are good at using Slack. They are looking for people who can change the world while sitting in a room alone. This chapter is a warning, but it is also an invitation. The barriers to entry for deep work are high, but that is exactly why it is lucrative. Most people will not do it. Most people cannot do it. They have been rewired by their devices to crave the dopamine of the new. They are addicted to the shallows. This means that if you can cultivate this power, if you can be the one who resists the urge to click, who embraces the difficulty of the task, who trains their mind to hold focus like a laser beam, you are stepping into a market with very little competition. You are becoming a scarce resource. And in economics, scarcity drives value. The world is awash in easy entertainment, quick summaries, and surface-level interactions. It is starving for depth. It is starving for solution to the complex problem, the beautifully crafted object, the breakthrough idea. These things do not come from 5-minute bursts of distracted effort. They come from the deep. As we look at the landscape of the 21st century, the choice becomes stark. You can remain in the shallows, frantically treading water, trying to keep up with the deluge of emails and messages, slowly becoming less relevant as the machines get smarter and the global talent pool gets deeper. Or you can dive. You can choose to master the tools of the new era. You can choose to become a machine of learning and production. The path of deep work is not just a productivity hack. It is a survival strategy for the economic winter that is coming for the distracted. It is the only way to ensure that you are not just a cog in a machine, but the architect of it. The value is there, waiting for anyone brave enough to shut the door, turn off the phone, and go to work. If the argument of the previous chapter holds true, if deep work is indeed the high-octane fuel of a new economy, capable of producing massive value and bestowing wealth upon those who master it, then we are left with a glaring, uncomfortable paradox. Why is it so rare? If this is the secret to success, why isn't every corporation in the world training its employees to focus? Why aren't we designing offices that resemble libraries or monasteries? Instead, we have done the exact opposite. We have designed the modern workplace to be a machine of perpetual distraction. We have torn down the walls and created the open office, a vast, noisy cavern where visual and auditory interruptions are not just possible, they are inevitable. We have adopted communication tools like Slack and Microsoft Teams that demand immediate responsiveness, turning every employee into a human router of information. We have created a culture where if you do not reply to an email within 15 minutes, you are viewed as negligent. If deep work is so profitable, why are businesses systematically destroying their employees' ability to perform it? To answer this, we must look beyond simple incompetence and examine the hidden psychological and cultural forces that drive the modern workplace. The first of these forces is what Newport identifies as the principle of least resistance. In a business environment, especially one as fast-paced and chaotic as the digital sector, the default behavior is rarely the most effective behavior. It is the easiest behavior. Consider the way we manage projects. The deep way to manage a project would be to sit down at the beginning, spend hours mapping out every contingency, define clear milestones, and establish a rigid communication protocol that allows people to work without interruption. But that is hard. It requires intense cognitive effort up front. It requires planning. The path of least resistance, however, is deceptively simple. Just start. Set up a group chat. Throw everyone into an email thread. If you have a question, just ping your colleague. If you need an update, just schedule a quick sync. This ad hoc, reactive style of management feels fluid. It feels like you are moving fast. But in reality, it devolves into a nightmare of constant interruptions. By avoiding the hard work of planning, we dump the logistical load onto the attention spans of the workers. We trade the difficulty of structure for the disastrous ease of connectivity. We allow our inboxes to run our lives because setting up a system where we don't have to check our email constantly would require us to make difficult decisions about accessibility and expectations. It is easier to be constantly distracted than to be deliberately disciplined. This principle of least resistance is compounded by a second, more insidious force: business as a proxy for productivity. In the industrial age, productivity was easy to measure. If you were working on an assembly line, your manager could look at you and see if you were working. If the pile of widgets was growing, you were productive. If you were standing still, you were not. But in the knowledge economy, the connection between visible activity and actual value has been severed. If you are a computer programmer, a writer, or a strategist, your most valuable work happens inside your head. To an outside observer, deep work looks a lot like doing nothing. It looks like staring out a window, or gazing at a blank screen, or reading a book. This ambiguity is terrifying for the modern worker and the modern manager. In the absence of clear indicators of what it means to be productive and valuable, knowledge workers turn back toward an industrial indicator of productivity: doing things in a visible manner. This is why we send emails at 10 p.m. This is why we reply instantly to messages even when we are in the middle of a complex task. This is why we attend meetings where we have nothing to contribute. We are performing the theater of work. We are signaling to our bosses and to ourselves, I am busy, therefore I am justifying my salary. This frantic, shallow activity protects us from the existential anxiety of wondering if we are actually creating value. It is a shield. If you are answering 200 emails a day, you can go home exhausted and tell yourself you worked hard. But if you spent 6 hours thinking deeply about a single strategy and produced only 1 page of notes, you might feel vulnerable. The culture pushes us toward the visible shallow because the invisible deep is too hard to measure. There's a third force at play here, one that borders on religious dogma, the cult of the internet. We have implicitly accepted the premise that if a technology is high-tech and connected, it is automatically good. We have stopped asking the critical question, what is the cost? We adopted the open office plan not because there was rigorous data proving it increased productivity. In fact, almost all data suggests it destroys it, but because it looked like the future. It looked like Silicon Valley. We adopted instant messaging platforms because they promise friction-free communication, without pausing to ask if friction might actually be necessary for deep thought. Newport argues that we have become a technopoly, a term coined by Neil Postman, where we surrender our judgment to the sovereignty of technology. If Facebook says we should be connected to everyone all the time, we assume that is the right way to live. If the new tool allows us to multitask, we assume multitasking is a virtue. We have let the tool makers, whose business model depends on fracturing our attention to sell ads, dictate the architecture of our working lives. We have forgotten that tools like email and social media are just that, tools. They are meant to serve us, not command us. By failing to scrutinize these technologies, by blindly accepting the narrative that more connection is always better, we have inadvertently designed a workplace that is hostile to the very thing that creates value. This creates a tragedy of the commons in the corporate world. Every individual manager wants their team to be responsive. Every client wants immediate access. But the aggregate result of these individual desires is a collective environment where no one can think. We have created a world where the ability to concentrate is under siege. It is not just that we are distracted. It is that we are actively punished for trying to focus. Try closing your door for 4 hours. Try not checking your email for a day. The social pressure to rejoin the hive mind is immense. You will be asked, is everything okay? You will be subtly reprimanded for being out of the loop. Cal Newport argues that this nihilism is not an inherent property of knowledge work. It is a symptom of shallow work. When we spend our days skimming the surface, bouncing between trivialities, we strip our professional lives of their gravity. We turn our jobs into a series of bureaucratic spasms. But Newport proposes a radical solution. We can re-enchant our work. We can infuse the abstract world of computer code, marketing strategy, and academic writing with the same sacred weight as the blacksmith's hammer. The secret lies in depth. By approaching our work with the intensity and reverence of craftsmen, we can transform even the most modern digital profession into something that nourishes the soul. The first pillar of this meaningfulness is neurological. We often assume that our feelings about the world are determined by what happens to us, by the objective events of our lives. But science tells a different story. The science writer Winifred Gallagher stumbled upon this truth in a brutal way. She was diagnosed with advanced cancer. As she walked out of the hospital, facing the terrifying prospect of a terminal illness, she made a conscious choice. She realized that she could not control the cancer, but she could control her attention. She decided, then and there, to focus her mind entirely on the things in her life that were good, beautiful, and productive, and to ruthlessly ignore the things that were fearful or trivial. She found, to her surprise, that her experience of the cancer was not one of terror, but often one of grace. Gallagher's insight, backed by decades of research, is that your world is the outcome of what you pay attention to. If you spend your day focusing on petty grievances, political outrage on Twitter, and the minor irritations of office politics, your brain will construct a reality that is petty, outrageous, and irritating. You are literally building a miserable world for yourself, neuron by neuron. The shallows are filled with these negative stimuli. The inbox is a catalog of other people's demands. The news feed is a catalog of the world's tragedies. When you allow your attention to drift into these spaces, You are inviting anxiety and superficiality to become the architects of your life. Deep work is the antidote. When you lock yourself in a room to solve a complex problem, whether it is writing a symphony or debugging a kernel code, you are hijacking your attention system. You are forcing your brain to focus exclusively on a high-value, structured target. In that state of deep concentration, there is no room for the petty. There is no room for the existential dread. The sheer difficulty of the task monopolizes your cognitive resources. As a result, the world you inhabit during those hours is a world of order, logic, and progress. The deep worker emerges from a 4-hour session, not just with a completed task, but with a mind that has been cleansed. They have spent their day residing in a realm of profound meaning, simply because that is where they chose to direct their spotlight. This leads us to the second pillar, the psychological argument. For this, we turn to the legendary psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and his concept of flow. For centuries, humanity has labored under a delusion about happiness. We believe that we are happiest when we are relaxing. We dream of the weekend, of the vacation, of the moment when we can lie on a beach and do absolutely nothing. We view work as a necessary evil, a tax we pay to buy our leisure. But when Csikszentmihalyi actually measured people's happiness levels throughout the day, using pages to prompt them to record their emotional state, he found the exact opposite. People were often miserable when they were relaxing. Left to its own devices, the human mind tends to drift toward chaos. It ruminates on past failures. It worries about future problems. It eats itself. Free time is often a breeding ground for psychic entropy. Conversely, the moments when people reported feeling the most euphoric, the most strong, and the most satisfied were moments when they were at work. Specifically, when they were engaged in a difficult task that stretched their abilities to the limit. This is flow. It is a state where the self vanishes, where time distorts, and where action and awareness merge. Deep work is an engine for generating flow. Shallow work is the enemy of flow. You cannot enter a flow state while checking your email every 6 minutes. The context switching shatters the concentration required to reach that psychological peak. Therefore, the person who builds a life around deep work is not just more productive. They are chemically and psychologically happier. They are spending a significant portion of their waking life in a state of optimal experience. They are not waiting for the vacation to start living. They are alive in the work itself. The irony is supreme. We work hard to avoid work, yet it is in the hardest work that we find the peace we are looking for. But there is a third, deeper argument that Newport presents, one that ventures into the philosophical. He draws on the work of Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly, who analyze the loss of the sacred in modern life. In the pre-modern world, meaning was given to you. The world was full of gods, rituals, and traditions that told you who you were and why you mattered. The wheelwright didn't just make wheels. He participated in a cosmic order. But the Enlightenment and the rise of secular individualism stripped that away. We liberated ourselves from the old gods, but in doing so, we found ourselves alone in a cold, indifferent universe. We were told to find our own meaning, a task that is exhausting and often leads to existential despair. Newport argues that craftsmanship is the way back. The craftsman does not need to invent meaning. He finds it in the object. When Rick Furrer hits the steel hits back. It has a reality that is independent of his ego. He must submit to the nature of the metal to master it. This submission to something outside of oneself is a form of secular prayer. It grounds a human being in reality. It saves us from the solipsism of our own heads. The knowledge worker can achieve the same salvation, but only through deep work. When a computer programmer strives to write the most elegant, efficient code possible, they are acting as a craftsman. They are respecting the materials of logic and syntax. When a writer agonizes over the rhythm of a sentence, refusing to settle for a cliché, they are honoring the craft of language. In these moments of intense care, the work becomes sacred. It stops being about the paycheck or the promotion. It becomes about the intrinsic value of doing a thing well. This is the code of the craftsman. It is the belief that there is an inherent dignity in mastery. It rejects the modern, cynical view that work is just a transaction. I give you time, you give me money. It asserts that work is where we humanize ourselves. By diving deep, by refusing the path of least resistance, the deep worker creates a private sanctuary of meaning. They may be working in a cubicle in a soulless corporate tower, but in the hours of their focus, they are no different from the stone-mason building cathedral. They are engaged in the timeless act of bringing order out of chaos. Compare this to the life of the shallow worker. The shallow worker is a leaf in the wind. They are reactive, batted around by the whims of others. They spend their days processing human-generated noise, replying to the reply, forwarding the forward. There is no craft in this. There is no submission to a higher standard quality. There is only the frantic treadmilling of the ego. Is it any wonder that this life leads to burnout? Burnout is not always caused by too much work. It is often caused by too much meaningless work. It is the exhaustion of the soul that realizes it has spent 10 years managing an inbox and has built nothing. The skeptic might ask, but isn't this elitist? Not everyone can be a craftsman. Some of us just have to answer phones. Newport acknowledges this, but he pushes back. He argues that the circle of craftsmanship is wider than we think. Even in jobs that seem mundane, depth can be found. A customer service representative who treats every interaction as a high-stakes puzzle of empathy and problem-solving, who focuses intensely on a human being on the other end of the line, is practicing a form of deep work. Meaning is not in the job title. It is in the approach. It is in the refusal to operate on autopilot. Ultimately, the argument that deep work is meaningful is an argument about what it means to be fully human. We are not machines designed to process data. We are evolved organisms designed to hunt, to track, to build, to solve. Our brains crave the friction of a hard problem. When we deny ourselves that friction, when we wrap ourselves in the cotton wool of easy distraction, we wither. We become anxious, bored, and hollow. To choose deep work is to choose to inhabit the world fully. It is to choose the good tired over the anxious drained. It is to stand at the end of the day, look at what you have done, whether it is a chapter of a book, a strategic plan, or a solved equation, and feel the solid weight of it in your hands. It is to know that you did not just exist today. You acted. You imposed your will upon the world. You created. This closes the first part of our investigation. We now know that deep work is valuable. It is a key to wealth and security in the 21st century. We know it is rare, a market opportunity created by the weakness of others. And now, we know it is meaningful, a path to a rich and satisfied soul. The why has been established. The case is closed. Now, we must turn our attention to the how. The philosophy is clear, but the practice is brutal. How do we actually do this? How do we carve out space for depth in a world that is screaming for our attention? How do we retrain our broken minds? The time for theory is over. It is time for the rules. Imagine an architectural blueprint for a building that does not exist. It is called the eudaimonia machine, a concept designed by the architect David Duane. The structure is a narrow rectangle, consisting of 5 rooms arranged in a linear progression. You enter at one end and must pass through each room to reach the next. The first room is a gallery, a place of inspiration and deep examples. The second is a salon, a coffee shop, buzz of intense conversation and debate. The third is the library, filled with the hard records of all that is known. The fourth is the office, a standard space for low-intensity administrative tasks. But at the very end of the corridor lies the 5th room, the chamber. This room is soundproofed. Its walls are thick. It is designed for total, uninterrupted focus. The goal of the eudaimonia machine is to create a physical environment where the user can achieve the highest level of human flourishing, eudaimonia, by creating a seamless transition from the chaotic world of ideas to the silent world of deep execution. We do not live in the eudaimonia machine. We live in the open plan office. We live in the notification center. We live in a world that is architecturally hostile to the very state of mind we are trying to achieve. This brings us to the first and most foundational rule of deep work. You must work deeply. It sounds redundant, almost tautological, but the how is surprisingly complex. The biggest mistake people make when they read the first part of this book is to assume that now that they understand the value of deep work, they can simply decide to do it. They think they can sit at their desk, surrounded by the usual chaos, and just use willpower to focus. This approach is doomed to fail. It fails because it misunderstands the nature of human will. We tend to think of willpower as a character trait, something you either have or you don't. But psychological research, particularly the work of Roy Baumeister, reveals that willpower is actually a resource. It is a muscle, and like any muscle, it tires. Every time you resist the urge to check your email, you burn a little bit of that fuel. Every time you force yourself to ignore a conversation happening behind you, you drain the battery. If your day is a constant battle of fighting off distractions, by the time you actually sit down to do the deep work, your tank is empty. You are psychologically exhausted. You will inevitably crumble and click over to YouTube. Therefore, the key to working deeply is not to rely on willpower. It is to build routines and rituals that minimize the amount of willpower required to transition into a state of focus. You need to design your own eudaimonia machine, not out of bricks and mortar, but out of habits and schedules. You must establish a philosophy of scheduling that fits your specific life, moving the act of deep work from a choice you have to make every day to a rule that you simply follow. Newport identifies four distinct philosophies of deep work. You must choose the one that aligns with your reality. Once you have chosen your philosophy, you must then cement it with ritual. It is not enough to say, I will work deeply from 8 to 10 o'clock. You need to construct a ritual that signals to your brain that a shift is occurring. The great thinkers of history were often obsessive about their rituals. Consider the poet W.H. Auden, who kept a schedule so precise it was said you could set your watch by his movements. Or consider Ludwig van Beethoven, who would count out exactly 60 coffee beans for his morning cup before sitting down to compose. These were not eccentricities. They were triggers. A good deep work ritual needs to answer 3 questions. First, where will you work and for how long? You need a specific location. Ideally, a room with a door. If not, a specific corner of the library, or even a pair of noise-canceling headphones that you only wear when deep working. The environment itself should trigger the focus. Second, how will you work once you start? You must have strict rules to prevent the internet from creeping in. Will you ban the internet entirely? Will you measure your output in words written or lines of code? You cannot leave this up to the moment. If you sit down and say, I'll just see what happens, you will fail. You need a structure. Third, how will you support your work? This refers to the physical needs of the machine. Do you have your coffee? Do you have the right lighting? Do you have the snacks? You do not want to break a profound train of thought because you are thirsty. There's a level of ritual that goes beyond the daily routine, something Newport calls the grand gesture. Sometimes, the daily grind is not enough to break through a creative block or to finish a massive project. Sometimes, you need to do something radical to shake your brain into a higher gear. The grand gesture involves a significant investment of time, money, or effort to create an environment that forces focus. The first is a monastic philosophy. This is the most extreme approach. It is the path of the hermit. The practitioner of the monastic philosophy attempts to maximize deep work by eliminating or radically minimizing all shallow obligations. They effectively remove themselves from the world. Consider the computer scientist Donald Knuth. Knuth is a legend in his field, a man who needs vast stretches of time to think about algorithms. If you go to his website, you will not find an email address. You will find a note that says, I have been a happy man ever since January 1st, 1990, when I no longer had an email address. I'd used email since about 1975, and it seems to me that 15 years of email is plenty for one lifetime. Knuth explains that his job is to be at the bottom of things, not on top of things. He does not attend meetings. He does not have a collaborative schedule. He has built a wall around his mind. This philosophy is incredibly effective because it removes the cognitive cost of switching contexts. There is no transition to deep work because the monk never leaves the deep. However, for most of us, this is impossible. If you are a manager, a parent, or someone whose job requires regular communication, the monastic approach is a fantasy. It is the nuclear option. The second approach is the bimodal philosophy. This is the strategy of Carl Jung. As we saw in the introduction, Jung did not live in a stone tower permanently. He had a clinical practice in Zurich. He had patients, students, and a family. He lived in the noisy, busy world. But when he needed to do deep work, he physically left that world and retreated to Bollingen. The bimodal worker divides their time into clearly defined, large chunks. These chunks might be on the scale of months, like a professor who teaches for one semester and writes for the next, or on the scale of days, like a consultant who is unreachable Monday through Thursday, but fully available Friday. The key to the bimodal philosophy is that during the deep time, the isolation is absolute. It is monasticism on a schedule. You do not check email just once in the morning. You are gone. Then, when the deep block is over, you return to shallow world and are fully present there. This approach works well for people who can control their schedule but cannot completely disappear. It respects the fact that deep work requires a minimum effective dose. You cannot go deep in 30 minutes. You need days. But what if you cannot disappear for days at a time? What if your boss demands to see you every afternoon? This brings us to the third, and perhaps most common, approach, the rhythmic philosophy. This is the strategy of the comedian Jerry Seinfeld. When asked how he wrote such good jokes, Seinfeld revealed his chain method. He had a big wall calendar, and every day that he wrote a joke, he would put a big red X on that day. After a few days, he had a chain. His only job was, don't break the chain. The rhythmic philosophy argues that the best way to start deep work is to turn it into a simple, daily habit. You do not wait for inspiration. You do not wait for a clear schedule. You carve out a specific time, say 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. every single morning, and you protect it with your life. By doing it at the same time every day, you remove the decision-making process. You don't have to ask, should I write today? The calendar says yes. This approach generates a rhythm. It may not achieve the intense multi-day depth of the bimodalist, but it makes up for it in consistency. Over the course of a year, the rhythmic worker produces a mountain of output simply by never stopping. This is the strategy for the person with a standard 9-to-5 job. You steal the hours before the world wakes up, or you lock the door for 90 minutes after lunch. The rhythm protects you. The fourth and final approach is the journalistic philosophy. This is the approach of Walter Isaacson, the biographer who wrote massive, complex books on Steve Jobs and Benjamin Franklin, while simultaneously running major media companies. Isaacson was famous for his ability to switch into deep mode at a moment's notice. If he had 20 minutes between meetings, he would retreat to a corner, pull out his laptop, and write deep, usable prose. When the meeting started, he would close the laptop and be fully present. This approach is seductive. We all want to believe we can be the Jason Bourne of productivity, dropping into high-intensity focus whenever we have a spare gap. But Newport warns us, this is not for beginners. This requires a brain that is highly trained to execute mental judo moves. It requires a tremendous amount of willpower to switch from manager mode to writer mode instantly. If you are not careful, you will spend those 20. The most famous example of this is J.K. Rowling. In 2007, she was trying to finish Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. The pressure was immense. She was at home in Edinburgh, but the house was filled with distractions, kids, dogs, the window cleaner, the constant reminders of her fame. She found she couldn't concentrate. So she did something extreme. She checked into a suite at the Balmoral Hotel, a 5-star hotel in downtown Edinburgh. It was incredibly expensive, but that was the point. By changing her environment so drastically, and by paying a significant amount of money to be there, she signaled to her brain, this is serious. We are not here to play. She wrote the end of the series in that hotel room. Bill Gates did the same thing with his Think Weeks. He would fly to a cabin in the woods, cut off all contact with Microsoft, and spend a week just reading and thinking. These grand gestures leverage a psychological concept called the sunk cost effect, but in a positive way. You think, I paid $1,000 to be in this hotel room. I better write some good pages. It raises the stakes. You don't need to check into a 5-star hotel to do this. It could be renting a cabin for a weekend, or even just going to a coffee shop on the other side of town and refusing to leave until you have finished a chapter. The novelty and the investment shock the system out of its lethargy. However, A warning is necessary. As we eulogize the solitary genius in the tower or the hotel room, we risk falling into the trap of thinking that deep work must always be a lonely endeavor. This is not true. In fact, some of the greatest innovations in history came from the collision of deep minds. This is the hub-and-spoke model of deep work. Consider Bell Labs in the mid-20th century, the birthplace of the transistor, the laser, and the Unix operating system. The architecture of Bell Labs was designed to force interaction. Long corridors connected the offices of physicists, chemists, and mathematicians. A theoretical physicist might bump into an experimentalist in the hallway, spark a conversation, and solve a problem that had been plaguing them for months. And this is a critical distinction. After that interaction, they could retreat to their private offices, close the door, and do the deep work required to maximize that spark. Deep work and collaboration are not mutually exclusive. They are symbiotic, but they must be separated. The problem with the modern open office is that it tries to mix them into a slurry. It forces collaboration to happen constantly, which means no one ever has the silence to actually execute on the ideas. The ideal model is the rhythm of the hub and spoke. You come into the hub to exchange ideas, to argue, to be inspired. Then you retreat down the spoke to your private solitude to process what you have learned. Collaboration provides a seed. Deep work provides a soil. Without the seed, you have nothing to grow. Without the soil, the seed dies. So, as we stand at the threshold of this new way of working, the instruction is clear. You cannot wait for the world to give you silence. The world will give you noise. You cannot wait for your boss to give you permission to disappear. Your boss wants you on Slack. You must take the initiative. You must become the architect of your own eudaimonia machine. Whether you choose the path of the monk, the bimodalist, the rhythmic worker, or the journalist, the requirement is the same. You must draw a line in the sand. You must say, beyond this point I am unavailable. You must build the ritual. You must shut the door. And then, in the silence you have fought to create, you must begin the work. To understand the second rule of deep work, we must step away from the office entirely and step into a gymnasium. Imagine a man who wants to become a world-class weightlifter. He buys the best equipment. He hires the best coach. And he sets aside 2 hours every morning to train. But for the other 14 waking hours of the day, he refuses to walk. If he has to go to the kitchen, he uses a motorized scooter. If he has to go upstairs, he takes an elevator. He systematically eliminates every ounce of physical exertion from his life outside of those 2 hours in the gym. What happens when this man tries to squat 500 pounds? He collapses. His muscles have atrophied. His tendons are weak. You cannot be a sedentary sloth for 90% of your life and an elite athlete for 10%. The body does not work that way. And yet, this is exactly how the modern knowledge worker treats their mind. We believe that we can spend our entire day in a state of frantic, shallow distraction, scrolling through feeds, tab switching, half watching Netflix while texting. And then, when the time comes to do deep work, we can simply flip a switch and summon the focus of a grandmaster. We view concentration as a discrete skill, something we can pull out of our pocket whenever we need it. But Cal Newport argues that concentration is not a skill. It is a physical state of the brain. And if you spend the vast majority of your life training your brain to be distracted, you are physically altering your neural circuitry to be incapable of depth. You are the weightlifter on the scooter. This leads us to the uncomfortable premise of rule number 2, embrace boredom. The enemy of deep work is not just a notification on your screen. It is your brain's addiction to novel stimuli. We have become a species of dopamine addicts. Think about the last time you stood in line at a grocery store or waited for a friend at a restaurant. What did you do the moment the inactivity hit? You pulled out your phone. You did not make a conscious choice to do it. Your hand moved before your mind even registered the boredom. We have conditioned ourselves to view any moment of stillness, any lack of input, as a crisis to be solved by a screen. The late Stanford professor Clifford Nass, who studied the behavior of multitaskers, discovered something terrifying. He found that people who constantly switch their attention are not just bad at focusing. They are bad at everything. They are worse at filtering out irrelevant information. They are worse at organizing their thoughts. And most chillingly, they cannot turn the state off. Even when they want to focus, their brains are constantly scanning the horizon for the next distraction. They have become, in NASA's words, suckers for irrelevancy. Their brains have been rewired to crave the noise. Therefore, to master deep work, you must retrain your brain to tolerate the absence of stimuli. You must relearn the art of being bored. This is not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It is about cognitive interval training. If every time you feel a twinge of boredom you relieve it with a glance at your phone, you're strengthening the neural pathway that says, boredom is dangerous. Seek distraction. You must break this loop. You must teach your brain that it is okay to stand in line and just look at the wall. It is okay to sit in a room and just think. Newport suggests a radical inversion of how we schedule our distraction. Most people schedule their work and let distraction fill in the cracks. They say, I will work from 9 to 5, but in reality, they are checking Instagram every 20 minutes. Newport proposes the opposite. Don't take breaks from distraction. Take breaks from focus. This means you schedule your distraction time. You say, I am allowed to check the internet at 10 a.m., 1 p.m., and 4 p.m. Outside of those blocks, the internet is dead to you. Even if your work requires the internet, you must treat it as a tool, not a toy. The power of this strategy lies in the spaces between the blocks. Imagine you are working on a hard problem at 10:30 a.m. You hit a wall. You feel stuck. The itch to check your email rises up like a physical craving. This is the moment of training. If you succumb and check, you fail. But if you hold the line, if you sit there staring at the cursor, sweating to the boredom and the frustration until your next scheduled break at 1 p.m., you are strengthening your focus muscle. You are teaching your brain that it can survive without the dopamine hit. You are building the cognitive callus necessary for deep work. To further harden this mental toughness, Newport introduces a technique inspired by one of the most intense figures in American history, Theodore Roosevelt. Before he was a president, Roosevelt was a Harvard student who had a wide array of interests: boxing, wrestling, naturalism, and politics. He wanted to do everything, but he also had to maintain his grades. His solution was a method of working that was blisteringly intense. He would look at an assignment that should take an average student 6 hours to complete. Roosevelt would say, I will finish this in 2 hours. This is a Roosevelt dash. It is a form of artificial crisis. You set a timer for a task with a deadline that seems impossible. You force yourself to work with a panic-inducing level of intensity. In this state, your brain simply does not have the bandwidth to wander. You cannot daydream about lunch when you have 45 minutes to write a 2,000-word essay. You must utilize every single neuron. By engaging in these dashes once or twice a week, you jolt your mind out of its lethargy. You raise the ceiling of what you consider to be intense focus. It is the sprinting equivalent of the deep work marathon. Finally, we must consider how to reclaim the dead time in our lives. We all have moments where our bodies are busy, but our minds are free, walking the dog, commuting, folding laundry. Usually, we plug in a podcast or call a friend. We fill the silence. Newport suggests a practice called productive meditation. The goal is to take a specific, complex professional problem, a structural flaw in your code, an outline for a chapter, a strategy for a client, and hold in your mind while you're physically occupied. This is incredibly difficult. The moment you start walking, your mind will want to drift to your grocery list or an argument you had 5 years ago. You must act as a mindfulness meditator. When you notice your attention drifting, you gently but firmly bring it back to the problem. You force your mind to grind on the specific variable you are trying to solve. This practice does two things. It utilizes time that would otherwise be wasted, and more importantly, it trains your brain to sustain focus on a single abstract concept for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. It turns your commute into a cognitive gym session. The lesson of rule number 2 is that you cannot separate your working life from your resting life. You are a unified organism. If you treat your attention like a cheap toy in the evenings and weekends, you cannot expect it to be a precision instrument on Monday morning. To embrace boredom is to reclaim your sovereignty. It is to say that you are content to be alone with your own thoughts. It is to recognize that the ability to sit quietly in a room without a screen, without a distraction, is the foundation of all great work. The deep life requires a mind that is comfortable in the silence. Stop filling the void. Stare into it until the ideas begin to form. We must also confront the sinister design of these tools. They are not neutral. They are engineered by behavioral psychologists to be addictive. They utilize variable rewards, the slot machine mechanic, to keep you pulling the lever. When you refresh your feed, you don't know what you're going to get. A like, a comment, an angry news story, a cute cat. That uncertainty releases dopamine. By using these tools, you are voluntarily carrying a casino in your pocket. You are subjecting your brain to a constant, high-speed bombardment of stimuli that degrades your capacity for sustained concentration. To quit them is not just a productivity hack. It is an act of reclaiming your cognitive sovereignty. It is refusing to be a lab rat in a Silicon Valley experiment. The argument here is not that the internet is evil. It is that the internet is powerful, and powerful tools require respect. If you want to use social media, use it like a craftsman. If you're a visual artist, perhaps Instagram is a vital tool for your portfolio. Fine, use it, but manage it. Post your work from your desktop, then close the tab. Do not have the app on your phone. Do not scroll. Use it for its specific purpose, then leave. Treat it like a table saw, useful for a specific task, but dangerous if you leave it running while you walk around the shop. Ultimately, quitting social media is about deciding what kind of life you want to lead. Do you want a life of fragmentation, where your attention is chopped into second-long increments, sold to advertisers, and scattered across a dozen platforms? Or do you want a life of cohesion, where you have the mental space to think big thoughts, to nurture real relationships, and to create work that lasts? The deep life is a life of selection. It is about saying no to the trivial many so that you can say yes to the vital few. It is scary to unplug. It feels like stepping off a moving train. But once you land and the noise of the engine fades into the distance, you will realize that you haven't been left behind. You have finally stopped moving just to stay in the same place. You are free to walk your own path at your own pace towards a destination of your own choosing. The silence is not empty. It is full of potential. We have now arrived at the final rule, and it requires us to confront a messy, uncomfortable truth about the nature of modern existence. Even if you build a fortress of solitude, even if you master the art of boredom, and even if you delete every social media app from your phone, the world will still try to claw its way in. There are tax returns to be filed. There are meetings that are mandatory. There are emails from your boss that actually do require an answer. There's the laundry, the grocery shopping, the scheduling of the dentist appointment. This is the sediment of life. Cal Newport calls this shallow work, non-cognitively demanding logistical-style tasks, often performed while distracted. The danger of shallow work is not that it exists. The danger is that it expands. It is a gas that fills every corner of the room if it is not contained. If you are not careful, the sheer volume of these minor obligations will rise up like a tide and drown your capacity for depth. Rule number 4, drain the shallows, is not a command to eliminate shallow work entirely. That is impossible unless you are a hermit. Rather, it is a command to contain it. It is a strategy to treat shallow work with the suspicion it deserves, to compress it into the smallest possible window of time, and to reclaim the vast majority of your day for the deep. The starting point for this containment is a realization about human biology. Studies suggest that the maximum amount of true, high-intensity, deep work a human being can perform in a day is roughly 4 hours. For a novice, it might be only 1 or 2. This leaves a significant portion of the workday unaccounted for. The mistake most people make is allowing this remainder to become a free-for-all of unstructured busyness. They think, I did my deep work this morning, so now I can just react to whatever comes in. This is fatal. To drain the shallows, you must treat your time with the rigor of a grandmaster playing chess. You must schedule every minute of your day. This sounds oppressive. It sounds like the behavior of a robot. But Newport argues that structure is actually the prerequisite for freedom. If you do not have a plan for your time, you will inevitably default to the path of least resistance. You will spend 3 hours answering emails that should have taken 30 minutes. You will browse the news. You will get sucked into a quick meeting that eats your entire afternoon. By scheduling every minute, by creating time blocks for everything, including your lunch, your relaxation, and your shallow tasks, you are forcing yourself to confront the reality of time. You are replacing wishful thinking with intentional execution. When you look at your schedule and see that you only have a 30-minute block allocated for email, a psychological shift occurs. You stop meandering. You stop crafting Shakespearean prose for a simple status update. You become efficient. The scarcity of the time block forces you to ruthlessly prioritize. You blast through the shallow work because you know the clock is ticking. This method, often called time blocking, turns a day into a series of conscious choices rather than a series of reactions. And if the schedule breaks, if a crisis emerges, that is fine. You simply rewrite the schedule for the rest of the day. The plan is not a prison. It is a map, and a map can be redrawn. This leads to the second major strategy, fixed schedule productivity. This is perhaps the most powerful tool for draining the shallows. Most people work with an output-centric mindset. They say, I will stay at the office until the work is done. The problem is that the shallow work is never done. There is always another email. This mindset leads to the slow, creeping expansion of the workday into the evening and the weekend, resulting in a state of chronic low-level burnout. Newport proposes inverting the equation. Instead of starting with the work, start with the schedule. Fix a firm deadline first. I will stop working at 5:30 p.m. This constraint acts as a forcing function. If you know with absolute certainty that you are leaving at 5:30, you can no longer afford to waste time. You become a hawk. You decline the useless meeting. You ignore the CC email chain. You optimize your workflow. The fixed schedule forces you to strip away the fat and leave only the muscle. It forces you to make the difficult decisions about what actually matters. By artificially capping your time, you skyrocket your productivity. You are not working longer. You are working smarter because you have no other choice.